My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 32, and I found out my parents erased me from their will in a lawyer's office that smelled like burnt coffee and cheap air freshener. I sat 3 chairs away from my brother Caleb, while Ms. Doyle slid a folder across the table and read, calm as a weather report, that the house, the savings, everything went to him. Not me, him. Caleb didn't even look surprised. He just tapped his foot like he was waiting for a receipt to print. Then the lawyer added one line that made my stomach drop harder than the will itself. The debt on the house transferred too. Before I go on, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been the responsible one in your family, the one who paid the bills, showed up, did everything right, and still got pushed aside when the house and the money were on the line. I read the comments, and I can tell you now, inheritance stories like this are never just about money. I didn't grow up in a house where people screamed or threw things. That almost made it worse. Our house sat on a quiet suburban street with maple trees lining the sidewalk and a mailbox that still had Miller written in faded black letters. From the outside, we looked like one of those families real estate agents love to photograph. Trim lawn, white siding, 2-car garage. Inside, the TV was always on low volume, the HVAC hummed like it was tired, and nobody ever said what they actually meant. From as far back as I can remember, I was the easy one. That was the word my mum liked. Ethan's easy. Easy meant I didn't complain. Easy meant I figured things out on my own. Easy meant if something needed to be done, it somehow landed on me without anyone asking. Caleb was different. Caleb was sensitive. Caleb struggled. Caleb needed more time. That difference started small. On Christmas mornings, Caleb unwrapped whatever toy was trending that year. Game consoles, bikes, things with batteries. I got clothes, practical stuff. My dad would clap me on the shoulder and say, "You'll appreciate that later." I learned early that appreciation was something I was expected to give, not receive. By high school, the roles were locked in. I worked part-time at a hardware store after classes. Caleb quit 2 jobs in 1 year because the managers didn't respect him. At dinner, my parents talked about Caleb like he was a project that just needed the right conditions. They talked about me like I was a solved problem. When I left for college, I stayed close to home. Not because I wanted to, but because my parents needed help. The mortgage wasn't crushing, but it wasn't light either. My dad's hours got cut 1 year, and my mum started talking about tight months. I took out student loans, worked weekends, and sent money home whenever my mum hinted things were stressful. She never asked directly. She didn't have to. Caleb went to college too. Dropped out after a year. "Not my thing," he said. Everyone nodded like that made sense. After graduation, I landed a steady job. Nothing flashy. Operations, logistics, schedules, spreadsheets. The kind of work nobody notices unless it falls apart. I moved into a small apartment 10 minutes from my parents' house, close enough to help when things broke, which they always did. The first time I paid part of the mortgage, my mum cried. She hugged me in the kitchen under the warm yellow light and said, "We're so proud of you." That feeling stuck with me longer than it should have. I chased it for years. I fixed the garage door when it jammed, replaced the water heater, paid for groceries when my parents' card declined at the store. Caleb was usually there too, sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, promising he'd figure things out soon. Thanksgiving was where the imbalance showed itself the clearest. 1 year I paid for almost everything, the turkey, the sides, the drinks. I got there early to help cook. Caleb showed up late, empty-handed. My mum still found a way to praise him. "Caleb's been under a lot of pressure," she said, patting his arm. "We're just so glad he made it." I remember standing at the sink, hands deep in dishwater, listening to that. Something tight settled in my chest. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself family wasn't a scoreboard, but it always felt like one. There were moments that should have warned me. Times when my dad lowered his voice and said, "Don't worry about the future. We've got things handled." My mum said, "You don't need to think about inheritance. You're strong. You'll be fine." She said it like it was a compliment. Once, late at night, I walked past their bedroom and heard raised voices. My mum sounded panicked. My dad sounded tired. "If we don't do this, we'll lose the house," she said. I froze in the hallway, heart pounding. Then the door shut, and the TV volume went up. The next morning, nobody mentioned it. I told myself it was none of my business. Looking back, that was the pattern. I saw pieces that didn't fit, and I taught myself how to look away. The house stayed standing, the bills stayed paid, and I stayed useful. By the time my dad asked me to help scan some paperwork a few months ago, it felt normal. He said the printer was acting up again. I sat at the dining table, feeding documents into the scanner, listening to the familiar mechanical whine. Bank statements, insurance forms, utility bills. Then I saw the folder. Estate plan, last will and testament. I stared at it longer than I should have. I told myself not to open it. I told myself trust mattered. I told myself I'd earned at least the right to know. I opened it. And that was the moment everything I thought I understood about my family quietly collapsed. I didn't read the whole thing at first. I skimmed, the way you skim something you're afraid will confirm a thought you don't want to have. Legal language blurred together, sections, clauses, dates. Then my eyes landed on the names. Caleb Miller. Again and again. I scrolled back up, convinced I'd missed something. There had to be a second page. An appendix, a footnote, something with my name on it. There wasn't. The only time I appeared was in a single, painfully generic sentence about how my parents love both of their sons equally. Equally. I felt my hands start to shake. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind you get when your body reacts before your mind catches up. I thought about the mortgage payments I'd made without being asked. The weekends I'd spent fixing things around the house instead of seeing friends. The groceries, the emergency repairs, the just this once help that never stayed just once. I kept reading, hoping something would make it make sense. It didn't. Everything, the house, the savings, the retirement accounts, went to Caleb. I sat there longer than I should have, listening to the scanner hum, the clock ticking on the wall, the same clock I'd helped replace the batteries in more times than I could count. It felt like the house was holding its breath. My dad walked back into the room and stopped when he saw the folder in my hands. "Hey, Ethan," he said carefully. "What's taking so long?" I didn't hide it. I couldn't. I held the will up between us like a mirror. "So this is it," I said. My voice sounded steady, which surprised me. "This is how it's set up." He went pale. Not shocked, more like caught. He exhaled slowly and rubbed his forehead. "It's not what you think," he said. I laughed once, short and bitter. "It looks pretty clear to me." "I've been helping you pay for this house for years, and I'm not even mentioned." He shifted his weight, eyes dropping to the floor. "It's complicated." That word again. The one he used whenever he didn't want to explain something uncomfortable. No apology, no gratitude, just an expectation that I'd accept it and move on. I called for my mum. When she came in and saw the papers, her face changed. She didn't look surprised. She looked guilty. "Ethan," she said softly, "honey, you don't need the inheritance." There it was, the line she'd been practicing for years. "You have a good job. You're independent. Caleb, he struggles. We just want to make sure he's taken care of." Something inside me snapped, not loudly, not all at once, but cleanly, like a rope finally giving way after being pulled too tight for too long. "So that's it?" I asked. "I take care of you, and you take care of him." "That's not fair," she said quickly. I nodded. "You're right, it's not." I set the will down on the table. My jaw was clenched so hard it hurt. "Got it," I said. "Now I know where I stand." They tried to talk, both of them. My dad reached for my arm. My mum said my name like she was soothing a child. I walked out instead. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it behind me and sat in my car until my hands stopped shaking. I didn't go back. For the first time in years, I didn't call to check in. I didn't stop by to fix anything. I didn't send money. I let the silence stretch. 2 weeks passed before my dad texted me. "Property taxes are due." No apology, no explanation, just a bill. I stared at the message, a strange calm settling over me. I typed back one sentence. Caleb will handle it. It's his house. 5 minutes later, my mum called. I let it ring. Then she texted, "Please don't do this. We need to talk." I waited an hour before responding. "You already made your choice." That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Caleb texted that night. "Why are you being such a drama queen? It's not a big deal. Just help them out like you always do." I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, because it was so predictable. "If it's not a big deal," I wrote back, "you won't mind paying, right?" He didn't respond. The next message came from my mum, this time sharper. "The family takes care of each other. We did so much for you growing up." I felt that old pressure in my chest, the urge to apologize, to explain, to smooth things over. Instead, I typed the truth. "You made it clear I wasn't part of the family when you left me out of the will." My dad chimed in after that. "We're not asking for much, just enough to cover the mortgage for a few months. Don't be selfish." Selfish. That was the word that finally burned everything else away. I turned my phone off and sat alone in my apartment, listening to the city noise outside, realizing something I'd never let myself say out loud before. They didn't see me as a son. They saw me as a solution, and I was done solving their problems. The silence didn't last. It never does in families like mine. 2 days after I turned my phone back on, I woke up to a notification that made my stomach drop. Not a text, not a missed call, a bank transfer request. My mum's name was right there on the screen, bright and unapologetic. No message attached, no explanation, just a number. $3,800, mortgage, late fees. I knew the math before I even thought about it. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in my hand, and laughed under my breath. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly on brand. They weren't asking anymore. They were assuming I'd cave, assuming I'd feel guilty enough to hit, approve, and make the problem disappear, like I always had. I declined it. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. "Mom." I let it ring out. Then a text popped up. "I know you saw the request. Why would you decline it?" I took my time answering. I made coffee. I watched steam curl out of the mug. I waited until my hands stopped shaking. "Because it's not my responsibility anymore," I typed. "Try Caleb." The phone rang again. I silenced it. Another text followed, this one tighter, more desperate. "We could lose the house if you don't help." That word, lose, used to scare me. It used to make me picture foreclosure notices and packed boxes, and my parents standing on the sidewalk with nowhere to go. But something had shifted. I'd seen too much. "You should have thought about that before deciding I didn't matter," I replied. My dad jumped in next. "Are you really going to let your parents become homeless?" That one actually made me smile. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost impressive. They weren't broke. They had savings. They just didn't want to touch them. Not when I'd always been easier. I didn't respond. That night, Caleb texted me, "Dude, just send them the money already. You're making this a bigger deal than it is." There it was. The entitlement wrapped in casual language, like I was being unreasonable for not continuing to fund a life I'd been cut out of. "The same money you're inheriting," I wrote back. "Why don't you send it?" His response came fast. "You know I don't have that kind of cash right now." Of course he didn't. He never did, and he never had to. "Guess you better figure it out," I replied. "You're the one they chose." Silence. For the first time in years, I went to bed feeling oddly calm. Not relieved, not happy, just done. Like I'd finally stepped out of a role I'd been cast in without my consent. The next morning, things escalated. I was at work, halfway through a routine call, when my phone buzzed again. This time it was my apartment's front desk. "Hey, Ethan," the receptionist said hesitantly. "Your parents are here." My heart slammed against my ribs. "Here?" "At the lobby. They're saying it's urgent." Of course they were. "I'm not expecting them," I said. "Please don't let them up." There was a pause. "They're being pretty pushy." "I don't care," I said. They can leave. I hung up and immediately got a text from my mum. We're downstairs. Open the door. No greeting, no explanation, just another demand. Then another. We're not leaving until you talk to us. I closed my laptop and stood up. My co-workers were still talking around me, unaware that my entire childhood was standing in my apartment lobby like an unpaid bill. Fine. If they wanted a conversation, they were going to hear things they couldn't ignore. When I got downstairs, they were exactly where I expected, clustered near the front desk like a unit. My mum with her arms crossed, wearing that disappointed expression she saved for when I stepped out of line. My dad was stiff, jaw tight, hands shoved into his jacket pockets like he was bracing for cold weather. And Caleb. He looked bored, like this was an inconvenience, not a consequence. The moment my mum saw me, she launched in. Ethan, finally, we need to talk. I stopped a few feet away, arms crossed. No, I said calmly. You need to leave. She blinked. Excuse me? You heard me. You don't get to show up at my home demanding money. My dad scoffed. Are you really going to let us lose the house over a petty grudge? I laughed. Not loud, not dramatic, cold. A petty grudge, I said. You mean deciding I was good enough to pay your bills, but not good enough to be in your will? My mum gasped like I'd slapped her. That's not fair. We did what we thought was best for the family. I tilted my head. You mean what was best for Caleb? The silence that followed was heavy, thick. Caleb shifted his weight, suddenly very interested in the floor. I turned to him. You're 28. Get a job. His head snapped up. What the hell, man? You want the house? I said evenly. Start acting like a homeowner. Pay the bills. Handle the taxes. I'm done being your backup plan. My dad stepped forward, voice hard. You're being selfish. I smiled again. That's rich. Coming from the people who planned to take everything and still expected me to pay for it. My mum tried one last time, voice trembling. We're family. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. Then why didn't you ever take care of me? She froze. No one spoke. I stepped back and pulled the door open. We're done here. I went upstairs and closed the door behind me, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with something dangerously close to freedom. And I had no idea that what I'd just done was about to push them into something much uglier. I thought that would be the end of it. I'd drawn a line. I'd said no out loud, to their faces, in a place where they couldn't twist my words later. For the first time in my life, I went a full night without checking my phone every few minutes, without bracing myself for the next crisis they'd somehow make my responsibility. I was wrong. The next morning, my phone was buzzing before I even got out of bed. Missed calls, voicemails, notifications, not just from my parents this time, from cousins, from an aunt I barely spoke to, even from one of my mum's church friends. That's when I opened Facebook. My mum had posted a long paragraph an hour earlier. It was wrapped in soft language and Bible-adjacent phrasing, but the message was clear. I didn't raise my son to turn his back on the family. When parents are struggling in their later years, real children step up. I'm heartbroken. The comments were already piling up. So sad. Kids these days don't know what sacrifice is, praying he comes to his senses. My dad had shared it with his own caption. We gave everything to our children. Some people forget that loyalty matters when money is involved. He tagged me. That's when my chest started to burn. But the worst one came from Caleb. He'd posted a photo of himself with my parents from years ago. One of those carefully chosen pictures where everyone looks happy and nothing is wrong. Family isn't about money, he wrote. It's about love, respect, and being there for the people who raised you. I'd do anything for my parents. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. The audacity of it. The way he'd rewritten reality with a few clean sentences and a smiling photo. Anyone reading it would think he was the hero, the devoted son, the one carrying the weight. I was the villain now, the selfish one, the ungrateful child who abandoned his parents when they needed him most. I didn't respond right away. I forced myself to slow down. I went to work. I sat through meetings. I nodded at spreadsheets while my phone buzzed in my pocket like it was alive. Around noon, a cousin I trusted sent me screenshots. "They're going hard," she wrote. "People are buying it." That's when I realized something important. This wasn't just emotional anymore. This was about control. They'd lost access to my money, so they were coming for my reputation instead. They were turning the story into something that would shame me back into compliance. And the scariest part was how natural it was for them. Like they'd done it before, just not this publicly. That afternoon, my dad left me a voicemail. His voice was different, sharper, angry. "You've embarrassed us," he said. "You've made us look like monsters. If you think this is over, you're wrong. You don't get to walk away from your family like this." I listened to it twice. Then I deleted it. An hour later, my mum texted, "We never wanted it to come to this. You're forcing our hand." Forcing. That word stuck with me. I sat in my car after work, the engine off, the parking lot emptying around me, and something clicked into place. All those years of "it's complicated," all the times I'd been told not to worry about paperwork, all the hints about money trouble that never quite added up. They weren't just hurt, they were scared. I thought about the bank request again, the amount, the late fees, the way the mortgage numbers had jumped faster than they should have. I pulled up my old banking app and scrolled through years of transfers, payments I'd made directly to their lender, amounts that steadily increased without clear explanation. I noticed something I hadn't before. About a year ago, the payment amount changed. Not gradually, all at once. I remembered my mum crying in the kitchen around that time. My dad said, "We just needed to restructure things for a bit." I nodded and sent more money. I opened my laptop and did something I'd never done while helping them before. I checked the public records. It didn't take long. There it was, a refinancing document, a home equity line of credit, taken out quietly, signed by both my parents. And buried in the details was the part that made my stomach go cold. The house wasn't just a house anymore. It was collateral. Whoever inherited it would inherit the responsibility to keep that debt from exploding. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, a strange calm settling over me. Not relief, not anger, clarity. Caleb didn't know. I was almost certain of it. The confidence he'd been strutting around with suddenly made sense. He thought he was getting a gift. He didn't realize it came with a ticking clock. My phone buzzed again. A message from Caleb. "You really screwed us, you know that? Mum's a mess, Dad's furious. Are you happy now?" I typed slowly, choosing each word. "You should probably read the paperwork before calling anyone selfish." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt something I hadn't felt since this all began. Control. They thought they'd cornered me, financially, socially, emotionally. They thought the will was the end of the story, the final move that put me back in my place. They had no idea I was already holding the part they'd hoped I'd never look at closely. And the next time we sat across from each other in a lawyer's office, the conversation was going to sound very different. The lawyer's office felt colder than it had the first time. Same wood-panelled walls, same faint smell of stale coffee and printer toner, same ticking clock that suddenly sounded louder than it should have. The difference was me. I wasn't shaking this time. Caleb sat to my left, sprawled back in his chair like he owned the place already. My mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she didn't actually need. My dad stared straight ahead, jaw tight, like if he didn't move, none of this would get worse. Miss Karen Doyle cleared her throat and folded her hands on the desk. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "I understand there have been questions." Caleb snorted. "Yeah, questions like why this turned into a circus." No one laughed. Miss Doyle opened the folder, the same one I'd seen at my parents' dining table months earlier. The sound of paper sliding against paper made my chest tighten anyway. She began reading again. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts, all of it was left to Caleb. Nothing new there. My parents avoided looking at me. Caleb's mouth twitched with something that looked like satisfaction. Then Miss Doyle paused. There is one clarification I need to make, she said, adjusting her glasses. Regarding the property. Caleb leaned forward, impatient. It's mine, we know. Miss Doyle met his eyes. The property is encumbered. Silence.
What does that mean?
My mom asked quickly. Miss Doyle turned a page. About 14 months ago, your parents took out a home equity line of credit tied to the house. It was later restructured. The outstanding balance is significant. Caleb frowned. Wait, what debt? My dad shifted in his seat. My mum's hand froze mid-air, tissue crumpling. Miss Doyle continued, her voice neutral, professional. Under the terms of the will, the beneficiary of the house also assumes responsibility for maintaining the obligations attached to it, mortgage payments, taxes, any defaults. Caleb laughed once. No, that's not how this works. You said I inherited the house. You inherit the house, she repeated calmly, and the responsibility to keep it from foreclosure. The colour drained from Caleb's face. He turned to my parents. What is she talking about? My mum opened her mouth, then closed it. My dad stared at the desk. I watched it all like I was outside my own body. The confusion, the panic. The realization spread across Caleb's face as the story he'd been telling himself collapsed. How much? Caleb asked, his voice sharp now. Miss Doyle named the number. The room went very quiet. That's not possible, Caleb said. Ethan was paying... He stopped himself. I felt every eye turn toward me. That's right, I said calmly. I was. My dad finally looked at me then. Ethan, no, I said. Not loud, just final. You don't get to explain now. I reached into my bag and slid a small stack of papers across the desk. Bank statements, transfers, dates, amounts, 5 years' worth. I paid the mortgage. I covered the increases. I paid after the refinance you didn't tell me about, I said. All while you were planning to give the house away like it was a gift. My mum started crying for real this time. We didn't mean for this to happen. That's the problem, I said. You never meant for me to matter. Caleb stood up. This is insane.
You let him pay while you...
My dad snapped. Sit down. Caleb didn't. You knew, he asked them, disbelief turning to anger. You knew and you didn't tell me. My mum whispered his name, reaching for his arm. He pulled away. Miss Doyle cleared her throat again. I want to be very clear. None of this is unusual in probate cases, but there are legal implications if there was misrepresentation or undue reliance on a third party for payments. She glanced at me. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I'm not here to take anything, I said, standing. I'm here to stop giving. Caleb looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as a backup, not as a safety net, as a problem. I gathered my things and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, Miss Doyle spoke again. Mr. Miller, she said, you may want to stay. There are options. I paused, hand on the door. I know, I said. I've read every line. And for the first time in that room, I felt something settle deep in my chest. They thought the will was the end. For me, it was just the moment the truth finally caught up with them. I didn't feel victorious when I walked out of that office. There was no rush, no moment where everything suddenly made sense or felt fair. Just cold air in the hallway and the quiet hum of the elevator as the doors closed in front of me. For a long time, I sat in my car without turning the key. My hands rested on the steering wheel, steady. That was new. For years, I'd lived in a constant state of reaction, fixing, paying, smoothing things over. Now there was nothing to fix, nothing to explain. They thought cutting me out of the will would erase me. What it really did was give me permission to stop protecting them. Over the next few days, I stopped arguing altogether. I didn't respond to messages. I didn't defend myself online. I started gathering information instead. Old emails where my parents promised the house would always be ours. Texts asking me to cover payments, just for now. Screenshots of the transfer requests they sent without a word. Dates, amounts, patterns. Paperwork doesn't lie. People do. I requested copies of everything. Loan disclosures, refinancing documents, prior drafts of the will. There was more than one version, and there were timelines that didn't line up the way they should have. I could contest the will. I could force everything into the open. A courtroom has a way of stripping family stories down to facts. But revenge, I was learning, didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it was just stepping back and letting people face the consequences of the plans they made without you. They thought I was weak because I stayed quiet. They thought I'd never fight because I always paid. They were wrong about both. I wasn't the forgotten son anymore. I was the one who knew where every signature was, when every lie was told, and exactly how much it had cost. And sooner or later, that was going to matter. If you've ever been the invisible one in your own family, the one who stayed, paid, and sacrificed while someone else was handed everything, hit subscribe. This story isn't just about inheritance or money. It's about what people reveal when they think you won't fight back. Like this video, share it with someone who's been burned by family decisions, and tell me in the comments what you would have done if you were in my place. I read every story.